Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here with another Master Duel video for you. Well, not quite Master Duel, but it is a Yu-Gi-Oh video. This is I wanted to try something a little bit different. This is kind of something I've been thinking about doing for a little while here, which is this Twitter account that I've been looking at for quite a while, which is Yu-Gi-Oh cards, but made by an AI. I honestly am kind of fascinated by things made by AIs in general, and in the past I had kind of a blast following the what is the Magic the Gathering one called? Is it the Rosewater bot? It's named after Mark Rosewater. It might be Rosebot, but in any case, it uses AI to generate, you know, Magic the Gathering cards. And sometimes they make sense, sometimes they don't, sometimes they're cool. But, you know, it seems that we have that set up here for Yu-Gi-Oh! As well. And I was looking through these and, like, more than I thought were actually, you know, surprisingly cohesive cards. And we're actually kind of, not even kind of, just a lot of fun to look at. So just a different video idea I had. I might try this out in the future. If this video gets a decent bit of reception here, I would be glad to keep it up in the future. Definitely let me know in the comments if you want to see more. I thought it'd be fun to rate some of these cards and see, like, how good are these? Like, how good would these be in the actual card game? Like, truly how good is an AI at designing Yu-Gi-Oh cards? I've got a few picked out here, some examples of good card design, some maybe less than great card design from the last couple of weeks, and yeah, I think without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and dive straight into it. I'm eager to start talking about these cards, and oh, and as far as like rating them goes, I will be rating them out of 10. As with any rating system, mine is extremely subjective, but basically the way I'm generally going to be scoring these cards is, you know, a 10 out of 10 card to me, as designed by the AI, would be one that, you know, can be printed as is, would be not just fine and make sense, but also like a genuinely good addition to the game, is what I'm looking for. And then, you know, if it's like, from there, you know, we dock points just based on like how much you'd have to rework the card to make it a workable card, is just my, again, very loose rating system at this point in time. So yeah, like I said, I've got a few picked out from the last couple of weeks here. So yeah, without further ado, let's just jump straight into it. I'm really eager to start looking at these. Okay, so the first card that we're going to look at from these AI-generated cards, you might have seen when we were looking at the Twitter page as a whole. This is the latest one actually posted earlier today, I think, at the time that I'm recording this, if I recall the date correctly. But anyway, this is Array of Revealing Light. It is a field spell that says you can activate one of these effects. Add one Lightsworn monster from your deck to your hand. Okay, so we've got some Lightsworn support. Tribute 2 Lightsworn monsters, even if face down, and if you do, special summon from your deck one Lightsworn monster with 200 defense. Or immediately after this effect resolves, normal summon one Lightsworn monster. You can only use this effect of Array of Revealing Light once per turn. So I wanted to start off with Array of Revealing Light here, not only because it's the latest card, again, posted at the time of recording this video, but I also think it's a really good example of a very solid card. This was kind of the one that I read and made me think, like, you know, there's enough of these that are actually, like, not just cohesive and make sense, but would also be like cool additions to the game, that I might want to make a series out of this and really talk about this and explore this. So Array of Revealing Light, I would honestly give a 9 out of 10. I wanted to start off strong and show a very solid opening entry here. I give Array of Revealing Light a 9 out of 10 because I think there's only one minor change you would have to make to the card to make it like a really solid inclusion to the game overall. Let's look at the effects again here. The first effect, I think, is pretty obviously the best one. You know, once per turn, being able to just add a Lightsworn monster from deck to hand. That's obviously very good, especially being on a field spell, which itself is going to be searchable by terraforming. Lightsworns do currently have, I think, only one field spell, and it's from like their first wave of support. And it's like god awful. It's like every time a card is milled, put a counter on this card, and then like your Lightsworns gain like 200 attack per counter. Yeah, no, obviously we're definitely due for an upgrade as far as field spells go. We were due for an upgrade on release. Like on release, that card was terrible, but this is definitely a much better field spell. And I think Lightsworns are in a position where if they just had like a continuous once per turn search, I think that's fine. You know, Lightsworns nowadays really aren't doing too much. They are used in some 60-card grass decks as a engine, but as an archetype, they're really not seeing too much play. And as far as like the Lightsworn monsters that are in the main deck itself, especially, you know, their boss monsters that are in the main deck are like, you know, the Judgment Dragon, or like whatever variant of Twilight Sworn's the Judgment Dragon, the Dark Judgment, you know what I mean, the other Judgment Dragon. And then their other boss monsters are typically in the extra deck, like the Link 3 and the Rank 4. All their other really powerful monsters are, you know, not in the main deck. So I think having an unfettered once per turn add a Lightsworn monster from deck to your hand is fine for the archetype. There might be some of these cards I review, by the way, where I read an effect and I think, oh, that's fine, but it might not be. Like, it might enable some like really, you know, stupid FTK that I'm not aware of. Definitely feel free to let me know that in the comments. I don't think this is one of those cards at all, but if that ever happens in the future, don't be shy about letting me know, like, hey, this card you said was fine, you could actually use it with this one other really obscure card that's a 2-card FTK that's really easy to search. So yeah, if that's the point, or if that's the case, then I will definitely reply and make sure to adjust to my rating accordingly. But the second effect here, I think, is where we can use a little bit of cleanup. Summoning a Lightsworn monster from your deck with exactly 200 defense. There are actually targets for this. There are 4 of them, which is a surprisingly good amount. As far as, like, you know, quantity-wise. As far as quality goes, nah. Basically, your targets are either of the 2 Lilas, regular Lila or Twilight Sworn Lila, which are, like, meh. They're not, you know, that's not worth really attributing to Lightsworn monsters to summon a Lila from your deck, but it's not an awful card. There's also the level 3 tuner, whose name I can't remember, which, you know, being able to search out a level 3 tuner, meh. Not bad. Again, not really worth attributing to monsters, but an option. And then there's Celestia, which you would never summon because, you know, her effect only activates when tribute summoned, so that's just a generic 2300 beat stick at that point. So, no real reason to search that. This is, I think, the place where we could use a little bit of cleanup here, and I actually think the card is slightly underpowered because of this restriction here. Honestly, I think you could just get rid of the words with 200 defense. Just make it tribute 2 Lightsworn monsters, even if face down, and if you do special summon from your deck 1 Lightsworn monster. I think that's perfectly fine. I still think that's honestly an underpowered effect. I think even if you remove the with 200 defense clause, this is still the weakest of the 3 effects. Not one you would use very often, but one that could potentially be used in a pinch. If a Lightsworn monster has like a soft once per turn effect, you could potentially tribute it and another Lightsworn monster and get out a Lumina, and then discard a card and bring back that Lightsworn monster and use your soft once per turn effect again. I don't think that's too powerful though, because that requires you to have this field spell, that Lightsworn monster you want to reuse, another Lightsworn monster to tribute, and a card to discard with the Lumina that you search. So again, I think removing with 200 defense is totally, you know, fine here. I don't really foresee that being an issue at all. And then finally, the last effect, immediately after this effect resolves, normal summon 1 Lightsworn monster. Not quite as good as a search, but definitely still not a bad effect either. Lightsworns, I don't think, are really a deck that would abuse extra normal summons too heavily, but it might make certain combos more, you know, viable. It might make a combo, you know, in particular, applicable. It might make stuff like Celestia, which requires a tribute summon, maybe a bit more viable. So, yeah, and then, you know, being a hard once per turn overall, I think is totally fine. And yeah, that cleans it up here. I think, again, this is a very solid opening example. Again, I'll give a 9 out of 10 just because I think the second effect could use a little bit of tweaking, but not much at all. And yeah, again, just like I said, wanted to start off with a very solid, strong entry here. So now that we've covered this one, let's go and take a look at the next. Alright, so the next card we've got up for review here is Stardust Chronicle Lys. Stardust Chronicle Lys, we have here a level 10 Light Dragon Synchro. Requirements are a Tuner Synchro monster and a non-Tuner Synchro monster, so it is a quote-unquote XL Synchro, kind of like your Shooting Star Dragon, your Shooting Quasar Dragon, which, you know, follows as a Stardust Synchro monster. Okay. 3,000 attack, 2,500 defense, decent stats, you know, for a quote-unquote XL Synchro. Definitely not bad at all. Let's see what the effect is here. If this card is Synchro summoned, you can draw 3 cards. Then, you can destroy monsters your opponent controls with less attack than this card. You can only use this effect of Stardust Chronicle Lys once per turn. Once per turn, during your opponent's turn, when your opponent activates a spell card, quick effect, you can negate the activation. If this card in its owner's control is destroyed by an opponent's card effect, or destroyed by an opponent's card by battle or card effect and sent to the graveyard, except during the damage step, you can destroy 1 card on the field. You can only use this effect of Stardust Chronicle Lys once per turn. Alright, so let's see here. Obviously, the first thing that's immediately going to jump out at me is the very first effect that draws 3 cards when this card is synchro summoned, and then wipes the opponent's board, but namely the drawing 3 cards. Wow, that's a lot of cards. On top of that, we have spell negation, and then the last effect is mostly irrelevant, just popping a card whenever it gets destroyed. You know, I think that effect's fine, it's mostly irrelevant. So this card overall, I kind of went back and forth a little bit on what exactly I wanted to rate this and how many changes I thought were necessary. And I think overall, I'm going to give Stardust Chronicle List a 6 out of 10. The card on the surface might seem fine, but a little overpowered, but I think there are some overall design issues to look at here with this card. First of all, let's start with the elephant in the room, the draw 3 cards. That obviously needs to change, right? Because, you know, I'm thinking about making this card, particularly with like Formula Synchron, would be a fairly common way to make this card with a level 8 Synchro monster. That would also be an additional draw. So Formula Synchron into list is a total of 4 card draw, and it definitely would not take 4 cards worth of resources in order to make Stardust Chronicle List. So you're always, as with this card as it currently stands, you're always plussing really hard when you summon this. And to be fair, it isn't a quote-unquote Excel synchro. It does take a fair bit of work to summon, so it should have a good payoff, right? I do agree with that, but I don't know that drawing a bunch of cards is necessarily the best kind of payoff for a monster like this. It feels a bit weird, right? You know, when you think of a big synchro like this, a synchro that takes a synchro tuner, like an Excel synchro, you think it should have some, like, you know, really strong effect that gives it a lot of board presence. Now, it does have a board wipe when it's summoned. That's good. It also negates spells. That's also good. I think tagging draw effects onto boss monsters like this is not only weird, but also a little bit dangerous, because when you're, you know, the end result of your resources ends in you getting a lot more resources, it's obviously going to mean that a lot of the time you can just go into a lot more plays, and if that's the case, then you know, all of a sudden we're looking at like a huge snowball where, and it's not even like you get like a search to maybe go for like an extender. You get to draw 3 cards off of this, which is, you know, 3 cards in a lot of decks is enough to make its own play in and of itself. So having another play after your play that leads you into lists, that might be a bit much here. So the question really comes in, how do we balance something like this, right? Do you make it draw 2 cards instead? Well, I think that's still honestly too powerful, to be frank. And again, just thinking about this in addition to Formula Synchron, which is where I think people would try to use it, that's still drawing a total of 3 cards, so that's still a lot. Okay, so what if we take it down and draw 1 card? Well, I think that's fine. I think as far as a power level goes, we're where we need to be, where you only draw 1 card. If you really want to use Formula Synchron, / if you end up using Formula Synchron, then you get to draw 2, which is strong, but I don't think terribly overpowered. The problem, I think, was saying, like, okay, we'll just make it draw 1 card and then we're good, right? I feel like at that point, this card is too much of like a random hodgepodge of different non-cohesive effects at that point. Like, it's like, you know, when it's summoned, you draw a card and then blow up the board, and then it negates spells? Like, this card feels like it's all over the place a little bit. I think when it comes to these big, like, you know, boss monsters, particularly these big synchro monsters, especially within the Stardust archetype, like, you think about the Stardust archetype, does it need another synchro like this? Does it need another big synchro, like a big Excel synchro in particular? Not really. It feels like, honestly, it can make do with another, like, more main deck support, or like even a smaller, like another alternative to Stardust or Stardust Spark Dragon. Maybe a new level 8 Stardust would be a synchro that'd be welcome to the archetype, but I really, like, as far as like these big Excel synchros we go, like, we've already got Shooting Star, we've got the Majestic Star stuff, there's like the TG variant of Shooting Star, there's Shooting Quasar, there's Blazing Cosmic Blazar Dragon, I was trying to remember what it's called. Like, we already have so many of these kinds of cards to go into that I don't think we need another one, especially one that's got like all these like scattered, good, but like scattered effects. So I feel like if we're gonna make a big Stardust synchro like this, it's gotta have a unique feel to it. It should be unique flavorfully, aesthetically, and it should definitely be unique mechanically. And I don't think this card, even if we nerf it down to draw one card, I don't think this card is doing enough unique mechanically to justify, I guess, its existence as yet another big Stardust synchro. So that's overall why I gave the card a 6 out of 10. It's not like offensively bad, and if you wanted to just tune the power level, that would be relatively easy. But I don't know that a card like this necessarily needs to exist, which is why I gave it a lower rating. So, alright, there's that one. Let's go and take a look at the next. Okay, so this card. This card. I wanted to make sure in the first, if this does end up being an ongoing series, which I kind of want it to be, again, let me know in the comments if that's something you would be interested in, but I wanted to make sure I include an example of some, shall we say, less than stellar design from the AI. So here we have Aitsu, the Light Monarch. Aitsu, by the way, is that level 5 vanilla monster that's got like a level 10 union. The red dude on a paper airplane. You might know them as one of the figures in Fossil Dig. That's their head sticking out the top here. When I first saw this, I thought it was like a tongue. It weirded me out, but that's Aitsu's head. If you're wondering what is going on with this art, as I was. But in any case, we have here, looks like a level 9 Light Thunder Fusion monster with 2800 attack and 1800 defense. Okay, I'm already gonna dock design points here because we're Aitsu the Light Monarch, right? And we have 2800 attack. How do you not have 1000 defense? All the Monarch support stuff with 2400/2800 attack and 1000 defense. Already a huge miss from the AI here. Already not impressed with this card, but let's move on. The fusion materials are the Shining Winged Beast and Dark Rose Dragon. I will say for fusion monsters, if they have materials like this of cards that don't exist, I think that's fine. I'm not going to rate them based on that. We can just assume that those cards would come out with this card, whatever. I'm not going to rate it based on that. Alright, let's read this text. The three are together with a crescent sword. This card gains 1500 attack and defense for every 500 attack and defense you control. While this card is in your graveyard, you can banish this card from your graveyard, and if you do, inflict 1000 damage to your opponent for each of their banished cards. Once per turn, when an opponent's monster activates a card or effect, you can, as a quick effect, tribute this card, negate the activation. If you do, destroy it. And if you do that, destroy it, then destroy it. And if you do that, add that card to your graveyard. If this card is special summoned from the graveyard, you can destroy it. Okay, so let's talk about all the things that are wrong with this text. Okay, so the first bit, obviously, that being the three are together with a crescent sword. There are times where the AI is pretty clearly pulling from vanilla monsters flavor text and kind of trying to apply it to an effect. As far as that goes, I'm typically not going to include too many entries that do that because it makes for just an incohesive card, which is not very, cohesive to being rated. I wanted to include this though because in a case like this where it's just a little blurb at the beginning and then it doesn't really matter, I'm willing to ignore it and rate the card anyway. In that case, that's the case where I will not dock design points necessarily. Let's start with all the things I will dock design points for. This is, by the way, a 1 out of 10. This is an example of a 1 out of 10 here, for a number of reasons, and we're gonna get into all of them right here. So let's just assume that the three are together with a crescent sword means when this card is fusion summoned or when this card is special summoned. Assuming that that's the case, this card gains 1500 attack and defense for every 500 attack and defense you control. So that's kind of interesting. I guess that is one interesting thing about this effect. We've not seen monsters that gain attack and defense based on how many attack and defense points are on the field. I think that is a design space that is potentially worth exploring, but you would have to very much regulate the stat distribution and the base stats of that monster to make sure that you don't end up something with too strong too easily, which is not at all what happened here with Aitsu. Now, the way this is hypothetically written, I think it is supposed to gain attack for itself as well, because you would summon this, the summon would resolve, and then you would activate this effect, right? And it's for every, it gains 1500 attack for every 500 attack slash defense you control. I don't think that means every 500 attack and also every 500 defense. I think that means every 500 points worth of attack and defense combined, right? So the way that I'm reading this would work is if you fusion summon Aitsu the Light Monarch and you have no other monsters on the board, its effect would trigger and it would gain 1500 attack points for every 500 attack slash defense you control being it, right? So I think this would work similarly to Light and Darkness Dragon for fellow Yugi boomers out there who remember. Light and Darkness Dragon could negate based on reducing its attack and defense points, and if you couldn't reduce both by a certain amount, you couldn't use the effect. I think something similar would happen here. So let's say Aitsu is the only thing on board and was summoned. It would gain 1500 attack for every 500 attack slash defense. It's got 1800 defense, so it's got, 1, 2, 3 instances of 500 attack slash defense, but then none beyond that, because the next instance of defense is only 300 out of full 500. That said, that still means that when you fusion summon this thing, it's got 7,300 attack points when it comes down. That's really scary, and that's if you don't control any other monsters. If you control literally any other monster at all, this thing is going to be at least 8,000 attack points. And I don't know that having something you can fusion summon that's just going to right out the gate come out with 8,000 attack points, I don't know how good that is for the game. Especially one that can get super, super strong, super, super easily, like Aitsu here. So there's a lot of design points knocked off there for just how easily this card can OTK just by summoning it, and it has a lot of attack points. But as if having one way to OTK wasn't enough, this card's actually got two. The second effect, while this card is in your graveyard, you can banish this card from your graveyard, and if you do, inflict 1,000 damage to your opponent for each of their banished cards. 1,000 damage per banished card is a lot. That's a lot. That's a lot. Your opponent only needs to have 8 cards banished for this to be an OTK. You also only need to banish this card from your graveyard to do that effect. So you could send this from your extra deck to the graveyard with an effect like the Dogmatica trap card, or even like Gale Doggrey. You could just pay 3,000 life points and just send this. And again, it's not hard for to banish 8 of your opponent's cards, right? We think about like Necroface decks. Necroface decks are all about decking your opponent out by banishing 5 cards at a time. So they're trying to banish 30 plus cards. Banishing 8 is so much easier in comparison to that. I mean, hell, even Gold Sark banished Necroface is 5 of those 8 cards right there. You could even potentially get multiple copies of this in the graveyard, because this is not a once per turn effect, and then you only have to banish 4 of your opponent's cards. So yeah, this effect is obviously not good or healthy at all, and this card can OTK multiple ways. Now, the last effect here, or I guess the second to last effect, is an Omni-Negate that destroys the card 3 times. I don't think that matters. I don't think destroying the same card multiple times all at once actually does anything. Even effects that say each time a card is destroyed, do this. Whatever. Even if those triggered 3 times, I think it's still fine. That's still very niche and narrow. I don't think it's broken or anything. I just don't think it's necessary. I don't understand why you would. Yeah, I don't understand why destroying a card multiple times matters. And then adding that card to your graveyard is I don't know. I don't know if that's an area of design really worth exploring. I feel like it's really weird. There's a reason Parasite never really took off. I can actually attest to Parasite not being a good idea. As a small child, one time I played a Parasite, actually got the flip effect off, and shuffled it into my opponent's deck. Guess who forgot their Parasite in their opponent's deck? And never saw it again. Me. So I think that's probably why Konami doesn't do effects like that anymore. Effects that put your opponent's cards in your deck / graveyard. I feel like that's way too easy of a scenario to happen, and I feel like for that reason it's not really a design space worth exploring. The only thing that's balanced about this card, I guess, is that it destroys itself when it's summoned from the graveyard, because then it doesn't get a whole bunch of attack points. But I mean, this is obviously a very much a joke card. I just wanted to show what a 1 out of 10 looks like. This card does not work for many reasons. But I'm not showing any more cards like that this time around. I do have more cards to show, but I assure you they're much more cohesive. Let's actually look at the next one here. Okay, so the next card we're going to take a look at is one that I actually think is really interesting. It's called The Banished. It is a level 4 Dark Fiend with 1700 attack, 1000 defense. It cannot be normal summoned or set. It has to first be special summoned from your hand by banishing one light and dark monster from your graveyard. Once per turn, during the standby phase, return all banished monsters to the hand. Whew. So that is quite an effect there. Getting all banished monsters back into your hand is not no small effect by any means here. I think the most interesting thing about this card, though, isn't necessarily that... Well, okay, obviously it is that effect of adding all banished monsters back to your hand. I think this is like a very interesting way to like implement that kind of effect, though, because normally you might expect to see that effect on like a spell or a trap card or something, or is like maybe like the when this boss monster is summoned, that's like one of the things it does. But there's a lot of interesting things going on here with the Banished. One is that they actually put it on a very small, innocuous monster. I say they as if this card was intentionally designed and not made by an AI, but having this kind of huge effect on a very small and innocuous monster like this is actually something I think is worth exploring. It kind of gives you a reason to like not just funnel into your boss monsters all the time, but actually like, you know, maybe we need to like, you know, get an army of smaller monsters and protect them somehow if they've all got effects worth it, like this one. I also think it's very interesting that this effect does not give you the cards right away. You have to wait until the standby phase to get them all, which is interesting for multiple reasons, because one, it means that you're not going to be able to use those cards the turn you summon this. You have to wait in order to get the value later. But there is actually another thing going on here. If you read the wording, it says return all banished monsters to the hand. The way this is worded, your opponent's going to get all of their banished monsters back into their hand as well. Now, most of the time, this probably won't matter if you're playing this out on like turn 1, but I do think it's an interesting kind of drawback to the card that like, not only does it potentially give your opponent back some stuff as well, but because this activates during the standby phase, the effect will go off during your opponent's standby phase, meaning they'll get their banished monsters back and they'll have the opportunity to use those monsters before you get the chance to use your banished monsters. This card, by the way, I kind of hesitantly give it an 8 out of 10 because I think there are some things you might need to rework with this card. I also think, I don't know. You know what? I just said 8 out of 10, and that's actually what I have written down here, because I did think about these and write these down beforehand, but I'm changing this to a 9 out of 10. I'm making this a 9 out of 10 like a ray of light, because I don't know that you necessarily have to change this card in order to balance it. I think as it is printed, it might already be balanced. The things that I would see, or the reason I would say it might be unbalanced, is because there are a lot of decks, particularly ones that want light and dark monsters in the graveyard, which you would banish, you know, obviously in order to summon the Banished. There are a lot of light and dark decks that can banish a lot, and I mean a lot of monsters. So this card could pretty easily get you a ton of advantage. I mean, I'm thinking about Dragon Link in particular, right? Like Dragon Link alone, like from having played that a lot, not a lot, but, you know, enough. That deck banishes a lot of monsters, and if you played the Banish on turn 1 in that deck, then during the next standby phase, well, the thing is, you're always going to be adding at least 2 monsters back, the 2 you banished with the Banished. But for Dragon Link, it's not hard to add another 2 or 3 monsters back. Let's say you're even adding 2. That's 4 cards getting added to your hand. That's a lot to work with. Now, again, you get them on your opponent's turn, but it can still be kind of like a... It can be a bit of a... And in this way, it'd be a bit of a win more card, but it can be an almost an insult to injury card, right? Where you make a whole bunch of negates as Dragon Link, you summon the Banished, and then not only do you have like your... you know, your multiple negates, but you also have all those resources back in your hand for a follow-up play on the next turn. That said, though, like I just said, that's kind of a win more thing, though, because if you've already got all the negates, like the Borland and all that stuff, that's already where you want to end up as a Dragon Link player. Like, do you really want to be playing the Banished as well and just kind of like throwing that on? One, I guess, proposed potential fix for this card would be to maybe have it activate during your end phase instead of the standby phase. because you would then still have this scenario where you get the banished monsters back at a time where you can't make use of them, but because it happens during your end phase, you would still have to discard down to 6. That way, if you're adding like 4, 5, 6 plus monsters to your hand with a banished, then you at least don't hold all of those resources through to your next turn. You have to still get rid of cards in your hand and down to 6 cards. I think that would be the slight change I would make to this card. I think that would balance it out just a little bit. I think otherwise it's not only perfectly fine as it is, but a very interesting card as printed. I think it should retain the effect that it returns all banished monsters. I think it should return your opponents as well as a potential bit of a drawback. But again, turn 1, most of the time that won't come up at all. But it also kind of makes it like if you had to activate every end phase instead of every standby phase, that still leaves it as like a bit of a threat to you that your opponent could take advantage of, because then they could play out a combo that potentially banishes a bunch of monsters, and then leave your banished alive, and then during their end phase they get a whole bunch of resources back. I think this card is very interesting. In terms of just like how intriguing the card is alone, I would give that a 10 out. I would give this a 10 out of 10. Again, I would just give it a 9 out of 10 in terms of like overall power level and design, because I think, again, changing it to once returned during the end phase instead of standby phase would balance it out just a little bit, just enough to make it interesting, but not like potentially super OP. So we have, I think, one more card we're going to take a look at. Let's go ahead and go straight into it. And the last card that we're going to take a look at for this video anyway, the way I'm talking, I'm pretty sure I am going to make another one of these at some point in the very near future. But again, I'm just going to hope the reception of this video is good. And again, I will encourage you, if you liked this video, to let me know in the comments, as that will definitely be a driving force to getting more of these videos out. But in any case, we got one last AI generated card to look at. That is going to be the Extra Powered Swords of Dark Worm. It is an equipped spell card that says once per turn during the battle phase, you can equip this card to another monster you control. When the equipped monster inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you can target one other monster your opponent controls, take control of that target. You can only control one Extra Powered Swords of Dark Worm. So this card is... I think this is another fairly interesting card we've got here. And I'm going to overall rate this card. This is another one where I actually kind of struggle if I should rate it an 8 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10. This one I'm going to rate an 8 out of 10 because I think there are maybe a little bit more... There might be a little bit more tuning required to this one in particular, because the potential of it is so swingy. That I think it could use some testing and potentially some balance changes. But this could be a card that might actually be fine as printed. Let's talk about it a little bit. So let's talk about the applications of a card like this. So, obviously the big effect we're all drawn to here is like, okay, we inflict battle damage to the equipped monster, then we get to take control of an opponent's monster, rather. One balance change I would make to this card is adding some sort of clause to that. As printed, you just get control of that monster, period, forever, with no other clauses or stipulations. I think there should be some. I think the monster you take control of should probably have its effects negated, and it should probably only be under your control for that turn. I think adding those two clauses would go a long way towards balancing this card, and I think the card might even be fine after that. I think as printed, it might be a bit much. You could make an argument that you might not want to allow monsters you take control of to attack, because this card actually, we're all drawn to this second effect of taking control of monsters, but in conjunction with that, the first effect actually becomes a lot more interesting. The fact that you can move this equipped spell to another monster means you could potentially take control of multiple monsters. Also means that potentially you can move this onto a monster you've taken control of and then battle with it to get control of another monster. For that reason, you could make an argument that the cards you take control of might not, I don't know. It would require a lot of testing, I think, because I actually see this card in multiple ways, right? I'm thinking about the applications of a card like this. How would you use this card? Two main ways I'm thinking of here, right? One would be to cheese it with monsters that attack directly. Tunes are the first thing that come to mind in that regard. Although Tunes already have, is it Comic Hand? They already have a really powerful card that takes control of opponent's monsters. So I don't think they necessarily need more of that, especially if it's based in battle, because I'm pretty sure Comic Hand, you can just like activate it and take control of something and make it a tune, right? I'm pretty sure that's what it does. I mean, there's some amount of stipulations, but suffice it to say, if you're playing a tune deck, you should be able to activate that card pretty easily. So I think in that regard, that's fine. I don't think Tunes have any trouble taking control of monsters right now, so additional ways to do that wouldn't be that problematic. Sky Striker is another deck that I think of pretty quickly in terms of this card. I'm thinking of Hayate, right? You could, summon Ray, link it to Hayate, equip Hayate with Swords of the Dark Worm, attack directly, take control of something. You can even move the swords off of the Hayate before you link the Hayate away in main phase 2. I think that's fine, though. I think if Sky Strikers want to run this quote-unquote random equip spell in order to get a small benefit when attacking with Hayate, I don't think that's too overpowered. I'm just trying to think. I'm trying to really remember, like, how much search is there for equip spells? There is Isold, but I don't think Sky Strikers can make very easy use of that. There's Hidden Armory, but that eats up your normal summons. That's fine. If you really want a Hidden Armory for this, I think that's fine. I think it should be fine in Sky Strikers. The other application I think of this, and this is where I think this card actually has some pretty cool design to it, is you could also view this card as like a battle-based board breaker in a lot of ways. And what I mean by that is, the way this card is currently written, as long as you had, like, let's say your opponent had even 4 monsters on the board, right? Let's say they have 4 monsters in the board that are in attack mode. And as long as you can make a monster that is stronger than their strongest monster and equip this card, equip that monster with this card, you can break that whole board. Because, again, as I believe, as is written, what you can do is, you go to battle phase, battle with your monster over their strongest monster, take control of it, move this equipped spell over to their monster that you just took control of, have their strongest monster battle over their second strongest monster, that destroys it, and then you gain control of one of their weaker monsters. So I said 4, it actually gets rid of 3 monsters, but still, if your opponent's got 3 monsters, 2 of which are in attack mode, this is a complete board break against that. Which I think a battle-based board breaker like this is fine. I like the idea of it in any case. Now, granted, breaking a board by taking control of the monsters is incredibly powerful. It's probably the most powerful way you could break a board. But the fact that it's like a battle-based board break, I think that in and of itself might be enough to go ahead and balance this out, right? I'm just thinking, like, I think this is a card that would require extensive testing, which I think is cool. I think it makes the card interesting. But I think it's fine to allow the monsters you take control of to battle. I think that's probably fine. You should probably still negate their effects, and you should probably have a stipulation that gives control of them back during the end phase. But I think if you added those, this card would be totally fine, and would probably then be a 10 out of 10 at that point. Again, I think more the testing would be more to see, like, how abusable this card is, how good is it in Sky Striker, are there any other random attack directly monsters that could really, / archetypes that could really abuse this. But I think even if that's the case, it would just take the adjustment of, okay, whatever you take control of can't attack. And then I think this card would be totally fine. In any case, fairly interesting here. And the card we're going to end off this video on. So thank you for watching all the way to the very end. I very much appreciate it. And I also very much appreciate those of you who are commenting and subscribing. Comments, as I've asked you multiple times throughout the video now, do let me know what you think of this video and this potential series idea. I really like it. I love looking at these AI-generated cards. I think they're fascinating. And I think it's even more fascinating when the AI manages to come up with cards that are like, not just like funny, but also like cool, where like this card is a great example where it's like, hey, this is actually a really neat effect worth thinking about, and like how would this effect work? Just that theorizing. I think it's fun. Pure speculative fun, but fun nonetheless. So let me know if you want to see more. I would be more than happy to oblige. Subscribing will let you know when videos like this drop. That does happen every single day, so know that when you subscribe, you do get a daily Master Duel video. But that's going to be all for this, this is a very tangentially Master Duel video, but you know what I mean. In any case, this is HexLex. That's all the time I've got for today, so I'm signing out. and I hope you have a fantastic day.